Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos. That's right, we're the original 4-H's of the bear world to review movies either current or classic. And this week we're doing a movie that started off classic, but now is current? Question mark. We're reviewing the new remake of Pinocchio on Disney Plus. We have lots of thoughts to share with you about this film,
Mhm.
and we'd love to hear your thoughts too. So, as we're talking, as we're doing our thing, jump into that live chat. Let us know what you think, and we may read your thoughts on air. And you're going to hear some thoughts on air that aren't just mine, because how boring would it be to just listen to me? Jim Pugliafico is with us in the virtual studio. Hey, babe, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. After a couple weeks, a little break for us. I'm glad to be back and talking movies with you guys again. We've got like you said, Brad, we've got a new movie that's kind of a remake of a very old movie. We'll talk about that a little bit. So there's a lot there. Um, yeah, and we'll figure out what is spoilers and what are not spoilers for this movie as we go, I guess.
Indeed, we'll walk that line carefully because
Uh-huh.
some changes have been made. I think some things would be spoilers for folks,
Changes, yeah.
so we'll be a little careful. Will Lindis is also here. How are you, Will?
Hey, no lion. I'm do. Whoa, sorry.
Whoa!
Okay, I'm good. No, yeah, no.
Well, put that wood away, will you?
Yeah, put that. Yeah, that's true. Like every time I tell a lie, you just hear a little underneath the
The
desk.
wood comes out when he's on the computer. Go figure.
No, I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. It's always fun to chat, talk movies with the two of you, with our listeners. And this is going to be a fun one because not only do we have, technically, it's not just one movie that we're talking about today. We're kind of talking about four because we're also going to be doing some plugs at the back part of the show. So I'm really excited whenever we get to laundry list out a few things that people get a chance to watch. So good episode, hopefully, in store.
Yeah.
Let's do this thing.
Indeed. Well, I'm definitely jonesing to talk about this film with you guys. As Jim mentioned, spoilers, of course, are going to be part of the discussion. The good news for you, possibly, is if you haven't seen the movie yet, we're going to protect you. That's right. We are not going to spoil you with intention, I guess. We're going to do our best to keep your experience pristine and spoiler free as possible until we get to the point where we're like, you know what? We're going to fucking spoil the hell out of this thing. And that is your cue to leave. Step aside, do whatever you need to do. Come on back for plugs at the end of the show. You aren't going to want to miss those. But, Jim, Will, here we go. Our discussion of Pinocchio. All right. So, Jim, of the three of us, you were the one who is closest to the original release of 1940s Pinocchio.
In what way?
Which way could that be?
Whoa.
Jesus Christ.
Seems only fitting that you be the one to kick off this discussion for us and tell us a little bit about, of course, what this movie is, what you thought of it, your initial impressions, and if you think this is worth people checking out, if they have a Disney Plus subscription, or if they don't, that's even part of the discussion. Should this, point them in the direction of getting one? What did you think of Pinocchio?
Well, before we get in, we'll get there. We'll get into what I thought of this newest iteration of Pinocchio, or this remake, I guess you could say. This one is definitely a remake of the beloved Walt Disney movie. Is actually there's the original Pinocchio movie is actually the second movie that Disney ever feature film that Disney ever put out, right after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, all the way back in 1940. So this movie, the original movie, is 82 years old. Think about that. I mean,
Wow.
that's It's an old film from 1940. But guess what? The original, I don't know if we don't go back to it that often, but it really still stands up if you watch that movie. It's one of the classics. I think I was reading today somewhere that it still has like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I don't know if that's true or not, but if so, that'd be pretty astounding. And it's it holds a place in my heart, not because it came out like around the time I was born. I'm not that old, but it is one of the like Disney gems. You know what I mean? That we kind of hold close to our heart. There's a lot of Disney films out there, but this is certainly one of the cornerstone films, I think, for Walt Disney. Now, that brings us to this remake. There's been several iterations of Pinocchio in movies. Matter of fact, I think we have another Pinocchio movie coming this year. I think Guillermo del Toro is involved in a Pinocchio film that's coming out this year, and I think I saw a teaser trailer for it. So we'll probably be talking about that maybe later this year. His vision of Pinocchio. This one is, of course, about the wooden boy, the wooden puppet boy, that with the help of a cricket friend as his conscience must prove himself worthy to become a real boy. And besides the remakes of Pinocchio, we've seen the flavor, we've seen the elements of Pinocchio used in a lot of different films. It's been used in plays, TV shows. One of my favorite uses that I'll mention before we get into like diving into this latest film is AI, artificial intelligence, has a really strong leaning on the story of Pinocchio and the elements of it, which goes all the way back to the year 1883, by the way, the original Adventures of Pinocchio, I think it was called.
Wow.
Book that came out, Italian author. And Disney grabbed onto it and Disneyfied it and made it their classic. This film is, I don't know how you describe it. It's one, I guess you could put it in the category of these new quote live action slash some animations thrown in there, remakes of their classics. A lot of people are saying, hey, Disney, wish Disney wouldn't do this. There's no way they're going to top the original. And in this case, I do agree. In most cases, actually, with these remakes that Disney is doing now to kind of farm, their legacy a little bit. I don't see what this film. Let me just put it out there. I didn't dislike this film. I thought it was fine. I think I actually even enjoyed some of it. I enjoyed parts of it. I had fun watching this to the degree. And in the end, I would recommend, the people who like Disney or who, are fans of their films through the years probably will want to go watch this. It's on Disney Plus. Most Disney files obviously would have access to Disney Plus, so it's easy to watch. You don't have to go to a movie theater to watch this. Nor do I think this is one of those films you say you have to see it in a movie theater. I don't think that's true at all. This one I think is fairly close. I mean, there's some changes that we'll talk about in spoilers, but I think this follows fairly close to the original story that was portrayed in the 1940 movie of Pinocchio. Story beat by story beat. It follows, or major story beat. It follows pretty close. There's some changes with characterizations. There's slight changes in the plot that we'll get to. But in the end, I did enjoy this one. I don't think it's a home run. It doesn't really push the question out of my mind about why is Disney, doing this. And I kind of wish they really wouldn't. Yeah, Will's right. They're doing it to mine more money out of their IP. But I don't think this really does a huge disservice to the original. The original still stands up. I think the original is better. But I think this one can be a lot of fun if you go in with an open mind. We'll talk about some of the issues I had with it, some of the things I liked about it as we get further. But I'm going to say, if you have Disney Plus, I think this is worth a watch.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for weighing in on that one, Jim. Let's head on over to Will. Will, did you feel similarly to Jim that this is worth a watch? Was this something you think you should skip? Where do you come down?
So these live action Disney remakes are, I mean, they're kind of my least favorite type of movie. And I think that's partially or very wholly into the fact that like they don't really do much new with the property. I mean, even you mentioned the Guillermo del Toro's doing an Adventures of Pinocchio remake that's coming out on Netflix later this year. You mentioned that, right? That's going to be a different look at the same story, even if it's some of the same pieces and the same parts in the same core story. You're going to get a different interpretation of that. But what we have with so many of these Disney live action movies, and what we have here, is just a photocopy of a photocopy. We don't get to see an interpretation of Geppetto or of Jiminy or Pinocchio. We get to see sort of impressions of them. And I think the difference is sort of the difference between mining IP and creativity, and this definitely does lean towards the first part. I'll say it flat out: I did not enjoy watching this, and do not recommend it. There are a couple of good parts to it, like this isn't like worst movie I've ever seen or anything like that. There's an addition of a new character, or just sort of like the interpretation of a character that I think is very interesting. And I wanted, if the movie was just that character and cut out all the rest of it, I think it would be a way better movie. There are a couple of neat visual things, but there's also so many visual elements that were so directly lifted from the original animation that, again, it just felt like it didn't even feel like homage. It felt like sort of like second-rate imitation. I don't know. I don't get the point. I don't get the purpose outside of like keeping the IPs alive and strong. I found this to be creatively bankrupt, and that's a sucky experience to have to experience for film. So some people are going to enjoy it, and that's super okay. But just for me, this one's a swing and a huge whiff.
All right, Will, thank you for your thoughts as well. Yeah, this is a question that we keep coming back to on this podcast since we review movies. Invariably, when these Disney remakes come out, they end up on our radar and people are talking about them, so we talk about them. And it's this question of, does this really need to be remade? Does this need to exist? And I know we've gone round and round and round and round and round and round in the past whether these remakes need to happen. And I guess for me, just to kind of kick things off with my thoughts, I was talking to a friend of mine today that has 2 young children, and she tried to show them the original Pinocchio, and they were just not into it. The art style was like way different than anything that they watch right now. The music was old and they just didn't get into it. But they watched this over the weekend and they freaking loved it. And the kids have been singing the songs so much that she wishes she'd never showed them the movie, because she will never, ever, ever be unable, to like hear those songs again. So in terms of, did this movie need to be made? Is this just Disney trying to, make more money? Yeah, obviously the Mouse House is trying to get more money out of their IP. But at the same time, this is introducing the story of Pinocchio to a whole new generation of kids who might not have watched the original movie or enjoyed it for whatever reason. So, I'm trying to give Disney a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. This isn't for us. We've had our Pinocchio. This is maybe for a new generation of kids, and I hope that they enjoy it. That said, I agree with you in that they didn't take a lot of risks with this. They had an opportunity to kind of reimagine Pinocchio, if you will, and it feels like a pretty beat for beat remake. I think there's a question there. Did it need to be updated? Did things need to be changed in order to make this more interesting, for a modern audience? We'll talk about some of those changes. Will, you mentioned a new character. There are actually a couple of new characters, one of which was voiced by Lorraine Bracco, who I did not recognize at first. But Jim and our friend Kevin, who watched it with us, pointed out, because we've been watching The Sopranos together, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's Dr. Melfi!" And I was like, "Oh my God, you're totally right." I enjoyed the performances in this film. I think everyone did a fine job. Really, really surprised that Joseph Gordon-Levitt was Jiminy Cricket. I didn't recognize the voice. We looked it up. The only performance that I'm gonna come down on a little bit is Tom Hanks. And I don't know if this is Tom Hanks's fault, but Tom Hanks is Tom Hanks in like everything nowadays. Like Tom Hanks is Mr. Rogers, Tom Hanks is Elvis's manager, but like it's all Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is a great actor. He does a lot of things very well, but it's really hard for me to not see him as Tom Hanks in a role these days. I felt like the accent that he put on was not great, and I almost wonder if it's, I don't know, should you have a non-Italian actor like doing Italian accents when they can't be done well? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, but it was very jarring. Tom Hanks kept pulling me out of the film. But I thought the animation was spectacular. There was a lot of great CGI work in this film. A lot of the character designs were really, really cool. Pinocchio himself, I thought, was awesome. Seeing the wood grain on his face, I thought was a very, very cool touch. I think some of the CGI around Figaro and Cleo, the cat and the fish, was not great. I don't know if the movie meant for them to be more akin to their cartoon counterparts, but Figaro as a cat looked kind of realistic, but also kind of cartoony, and I don't know, it didn't work very well for me. But that said, my friend whose kids watched it are obsessed with Figaro and want a Figaro toy now. So what do I know? I'm not a kid. I think if you have Disney Plus and maybe you have young children and you loved Pinocchio growing up and you want to introduce them to Pinocchio, maybe try and show them the old one. But if it doesn't resonate like it did, for lots of people probably, this is probably the one to show them and have them experience. Maybe it kind of sucks that, you need a CGI fest in order to get kids interested in things these days. They made a new He-Man on Netflix that is all CGI, and that's the only way that new kids are enjoying He-Man, and I'm a little sad about that, maybe a little bitter, but I get it. It's just one of those things where, kids these days like what they like, and the old stuff doesn't always trip their triggers. So this is a very, very soft recommend for me. I'm glad new kids are getting to experience Pinocchio. But yeah, I don't think this one was made for me, and I don't think it resonated as much as it probably would for a little kid.
You mentioned you mentioned the Tom Hanks thing, and I think that reflects very easily sort of like the core problem that I have with this model, and especially as it was implemented here. I think that Tom Hanks is one of those actors who, you're right, he has some certain characteristics that when he plays into those, he can be really, really good, and when he goes beyond that, not so much. And that's true of every actor, right? You cast the right person to the right role to do what you want. But it almost feels like in this case, they got Tom Hanks and then they said, okay, now I need you to do a Geppetto impression. Oh, but I'm not really good at doing a Geppetto impression. Sorry, we're not doing anything but Geppetto impression.
You're Tom Hanks.
You're Tom Hanks, and you're going to do a Geppetto impression because we can't not do a Geppetto impression for Geppetto. When realistically, they could have had him do anything, literally anything. The same thing with, you mentioned Figaro and Cleo. I felt like more so than in the original animated one, their presence here didn't feel like it was to give like the movie additional life or additional energy. These characters felt like they were there because they were recognizable from the original cartoon, and you had to include them in, even if you had to kind of shoehorn in some like minor references in the background to them. Again, like this was not creatively motivated in terms of how those three characters, Figaro, Cleo, and Geppetto, were utilized in this film. It was just, we have to use them because that's how it existed in the original movie. And that's just such a struggle for me to try to watch.
Yeah. I think what, it's interesting that I'm going to compare this movie. I mean, we could compare it to several Disney live action remakes, Lion King. But I'm going to compare this movie to another one that I really did not like, and that was Dumbo. If you guys remember the Dumbo remake, there's one where I think they tried to take the original elements, recreate them, but then add a layer of modern stuff, modern like stuff, right? With kids, with kid characters and, more human characters and an evil, carnival owner and, all that stuff. And that, I thought adding that stuff to the very simple story of Dumbo, I thought made it much worse, at least for me. In this case, they really didn't add a lot of new stuff. Will, as you said, they really didn't kind of put a different spin on it. Like, I'm sure Guillermo del Toro is going to do something totally different based on what I've seen in the teaser. And that's a totally different vision, right, of Pinocchio. This is kind of the original vision, original story. And, they stuck to it close enough where I think a lot of my favorableness toward this movie is based maybe in nostalgia, right, for the original. I don't think they trashed the original like I thought they did with Dumbo. You know what I mean? I think that they did is they tried to recreate it. It looked like they had respect and admiration for the original, and that came through in this. The new touches were great. There was a new, there's I don't think we get as much of the blue fairy in this one as we did in the original. I can't quite remember, or do we actually get more? I can't remember. Less in this one. Yeah. We get a new character, Will, as you mentioned. Besides Seagull, we get trying to remember the character's name. Was it Sabina? Was that the character's name, or Fabiana? I can't remember.
Well,
what that. I'm having a little trouble.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
What's that?
Fabiana Fabiana is who you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
okay,
Sophia.
We'll talk about that a little bit, but yeah, I think, like I said, I think there is a loving reverence, I think, for the original material that does come through here, both in the performances. I mean, I loved Keegan-Michael Key as Honest John in this. I thought he was really, really good. A really good Honest John representation. The Tom Hanks thing, I didn't have as much trouble as I thought I was, because I saw the Elvis movie, and to me that was a rough Tom Hanks go, if you ask me. I mean, the accent in that was way, way worse than even this movie.
If you're grading him on a curve, he gets an Oscar for this one.
yeah, exactly. And I thought, like I said, the voice performances were fine in this one. Even the young Pinocchio kid, I thought did really well. They kept several of the original songs, the iconic songs, An Actor's Life for me, and There's No Strings. I think No Strings is one of the songs that really good. We'll get into some of the
When
other
You Wish
changes.
Upon a Star.
Yep.
Yeah, When You Wish Upon a Star. Some really classic stuff in here. And I think they were very, well recreated. So, I think, in the end, I think my pass that I give to this movie is partially based on just my love of the whole Pinocchio thing. And even though I love Dumbo, the original, just as much, I could see it go wrong in the Dumbo remake in a way that I don't think it went wrong in this one.
They could have made it more modern. The kids could have had cell phones, and they're all taking videos of, Pinocchio performing on stage. They could have done a lot different. It is a risk, though. You know what I mean? Like, especially for a film like this, being a remake, you have people coming to it because they love Pinocchio and they want to see, a new version of Pinocchio. But if you stray too far, people get pissed off because you're dumping what they love, right?
Mm.
If you stay too close to the original, you're not being imaginative enough. So it's almost like this tightrope that you have to
It's
walk
almost
with
a
a remake.
no-win. It's almost a no-win with these remakes, really. I mean, there aren't many remakes that have knocked it out of the park that I can think of.
And that's the thing, and I think ultimately that's it for me. Now, I don't run Disney, so it doesn't matter, but I think that's the problem. It is a no-win because they're remaking their own property, so their number one imperative is protect the brand more so than tell the story, right? So
Yeah.
when you have like these remakes that are like there's a version of Pinocchio last year, there was a version of Pinocchio a few years ago, there's another version of Pinocchio coming, and these are not Disney ones because it's public domain story at this point. Each one of those is able to tell its story for good or for ill in whichever way it wants to tell it. But Disney has to do certain things. It has to have a Jiminy Cricket who looks and sounds like this. It has to have a Pinocchio who looks exactly like this, because you can't continue to license or brand those products and those characters within the parks if they veer too far from that. And so, I mean, you're right. It is sort of like a tightrope where you're kind of damned if you do and if you're damned if you don't. And I think that's ultimately why if I had magic wand, Starlight, Starbright, First Star, I See Tonight, I wish I might never make any more of these damn remakes, because all of them fall into the same problem. They either struggle because they're not able to veer far enough away, or they veer so far that they lose sight of what they're doing, but they never do so in, at least to me, what feels like a purposeful way. I'm sure there's, we just saw the trailer for Little Mermaid. I know Hercules is in the works. Like, we're gonna keep reviewing these, and I'm waiting for the one where I come in.
I'm
here
not sure
and
it's going to happen. Well,
but I don't know if it is. Yeah,
I don't.
Well, I think that the trouble is it's a non-principle thing, right? Like, love and adoration for you. Well, on principle, you don't think these remakes should happen, that they should exist, right? So I think any Disney remake that you watch, you're going to probably view through that lens. I think where I'm a little different, I view it through the lens of like, this is for a new generation of kids who maybe wouldn't enjoy what came before, who maybe wouldn't be exposed to the things that I love, if these remakes didn't exist. I mean, we have kids today who literally grew up with the live action remake of Beauty and the Beast and the live action redo of The Lion King. That is their Lion King. That is their Beauty and the Beast, because the original animated ones just didn't do it for them. So my question is like, do we rob this generation or generations of kids of these wonderful stories and these beautiful Disney properties? Or do we just say, well, you didn't like the original, you couldn't get into it, you're out of luck, get the fuck out? And that's that's the struggle that I have with whether these remakes should be made. I don't think they're all great. I think 95% of them have not been good at all. But I do understand and appreciate, cash grab aside, what I think Disney is trying to do in bringing these stories to, new people, even if they don't necessarily trip the old people's triggers.
Yeah.
What's not to like about the classic Little Mermaid? What is not to like? Even if you're a kid today, what would you not like? Is it weird? Is it like
the animation style is old? The music is very much a product of its time, the way that it sounds. I mean, there's lots of things that you could point out from today's modern standards. Kids are watching shows these days that are like very CGI and have very modern like musical trends.
Is very different today. Yeah,
right.
Singers are very different. In the styles, right?
Okay, well then, for me, it's like, if that's the case, then let's do something with it, right? If we're going to tell a new story for a new generation, or tell an old story for a new generation, let's do that. But I think they're so beholden to brand that what they're doing is they're just creating sort of a weird facsimile product, which to me, Disney is making remarkable films in their original property side of things, whether it be Pixar or even their original animation stuff, because they're less beholden to things. They're able to just tell a story, tell a good story, tell it well. And so I almost feel like, I understand that, but I don't feel like we're robbing this generation of anything as much as, we have the potential to maybe do a better job of presenting these stories to them. If we're going to do it, let's show them that we can be creative with our storytelling. And it's the same problem I run into with some of the other ones, like the Minions movies. I think, are they're popular, but they're also, good. And so I think that I always feel like there are some amazing things happening in children's animation right now, even outside of the world of movies. If you look at some of the television that is happening through like some of the stuff like Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon shows, even stuff that's appeared on like kind of HBO original properties before they started axing animation, which is a whole different thing. Children have an amazing set of stories, which I would even argue is by and large better from a storytelling perspective than the animation that we grew up with on the average on the curve. So it frustrates me that same level of quality doesn't seem to also permeate into these live actions. There's a tentativeness to the creation of these that I just wish wasn't there, because these could be so good if they just allowed themselves to be so good.
Maybe the story itself is dated. Maybe the story itself is dated. Like, it doesn't matter how you present it, with which cutting edge animation or music you overlay on the story. The story of a talking fox, convincing a wooden puppet boy to go into a traveling road show is just a dated thing. Like, kids don't even know like what those traveling sideshows were. So yeah, in a way, maybe that's just the general story itself is dated in a way that isn't going to work for today's kids. I don't know.
I mean, I have never been the biggest Pinocchio fan. I like the original movie. I don't love the original movie.
Yeah.
I like this remake. I don't love this remake. But what I do think is cool is I saw lots of people over the weekend who are our age, who have kids now, who were sitting down to watch this version of Pinocchio with their kids, and they were enjoying it right along with their children. And I think as a bonding opportunity with their kids and something they can do together and share, that's awesome. But I think we could probably have this argument for days and days and days and days.
We'll have it 2 or 3 times a year at the rate Disney's doing it.
I'm sure we will. I guess for me, I'm just trying to give a little bit of just benefit of the doubt, in some ways. But I definitely get where you're coming from. Fellas, I know we want to talk spoilers, and there are a few things we want to get to. So my suggestion would be we go ahead and make that jump. What do you guys think?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's get into spoiler. Let's cut the strings.
Okay, I like it. If you have not yet seen the 2022 version of Pinocchio on Disney Plus and you value your innocence, now is your time to step away. Come on back in 11 minutes and 4 seconds for plugs. You're not going to want to miss those. Or if you're listening to the magic of digital tape delay, just go ahead and skip ahead according to the time index in the show notes that Jim lovingly puts in there for you, and you can skip right on ahead to those plugs. Spoilers for Pinocchio are officially fair game in 3, 2, 1.
All right.
Yes. So, a couple comments in the live chat I want to get to real quick. Mike Lovins, Magic Mike. Hey, buddy. He says, I'm so glad that Jim enjoyed it. That makes one of us. I was so bored and did not enjoy this at all. The original is so superior. No need to bother with this BS. Jim, since he's responding to you.
I'm in the 3% on this. I know for a fact that I'm probably in the 3%, but I am proudly a member of the 3%ers in this.
All right, represent. And Thomas, hey Thomas, good to see you. He says my brother and I are waiting for the Black Hole remake.
Is that a thing? Is that a real thing?
I don't know if it is.
That might be a joke. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a real
it's a
thing.
movie from the. I mean, it's the movie from the late '70s that Disney made. I just don't know if they're.
Yeah, I mean, they
they're remake.
remade Lost in Space. They might as well remake the Black Hole.
Yeah, no, it was totally a thing. There were super cute robots, and
Mhm.
I mean, it was more
Bob and
yeah.
You know which one I would like to see? You know, if we're really talking about like, you know, hey, I'd like to see a Disney remake of this. I'd like to see some of the ones that struggled upon release get another pass. Give me the Black Cauldron. Like that movie like is sort of the you know, we don't talk about Bruno of the Disney animation franchise, which sucks because you know it's a neat little book adapted into a movie. Man, I would love to see that one redone and sort of see them bring those characters to life and do something with the story because I think that one does deserve sort of a second attempt.
I agree with you, Will. I'd love to see that. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but there's a whole series of books set in that universe that are fantastic, and I'd love to see all of them translated into animated films of some kind. That would be amazing.
So, quick aside, we had in one of our I don't know which grade I was in, 6th grade, I think. We had to read the first book of another trilogy by that same author. The Westmark trilogy, and we had to read it during class, and I was immediately enthralled. So while we were reading it sort of chapter by chapter in class, I went home that weekend, read that entire trilogy, and then over the course of the week picked up the 5 books in the Black Cauldron series. And then by the time we doubled back around, I had read basically 8 of this dude's books and forgot a lot of what happened in the first one and had to go back and reread it just to catch back up to the class. Yeah, it's that's part of why I want to see that one done well.
Yeah.
It sucks that that's the stepchild of the
Is that the
Disney
Black Cauldron universe? Is that what we're talking about?
the Black Cauldron.
Black Cauldron.
The Black Cauldron verse?
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we have 7 minutes and 30 seconds to talk about spoilers now. I'm just kidding. We have more time than that. But where do you guys really want to dig in with spoilers?
Well, we said we'd talk about some of those differences, right? We've noticed between this one. Let's just compare this one and not the 8 or 10 other ones, but this one and the original, right? There were several that I thought were interesting. One is basically the ending. How it ended. In the original, in this one, it's kind of left ambiguous as to whether Pinocchio will ever be a real boy, get his wish that he might become a real boy. It's hinted at very strongly that because he shows, he's brave and he shows, I forget what it's called, like he has to care for other people,
trustworthiness.
He has to be brave, selfless, and honest.
That's right. That's what I was looking for. And he showed all those, and there was some little blue fairy with the tear coming down his face, and then there was a blue glow in the cave that they were walking to right at the end. And we went back and actually watched the ending again, because it turns out that the animations changed slightly of the character. It actually does. If you watch it in the very last shot when they're walking away, he doesn't have the wooden joints anymore. It's like he's got like a real kid's body, like a kid's body. So we see that kind of change into Pinocchio. It's much less overt than the original one is, where it's bring magic. He turns into a real boy right there in front of Geppetto.
And that's an interesting choice. I don't know if they're trying to subvert expectations or what, but it almost feels like it steals away the nice reward that you get at the end of the journey, for sitting through this whole movie. I was scratching my head a little bit as to why they would make that change.
The 2 changes were the 2 things that I liked the best about this movie. I really liked that they sort of like reinterpreted the ending of this movie to no longer being you went on this journey, therefore you get this physical transformation, and more what he got was sort of
hopefulness, kind of
like a confirmation of self. Like, I think that, if there was a physical transformation or not, depending on where you cut the scene or whatever, you still get the feeling that this Pinocchio character learned something and feels more comfortable with who he is and his role within his family, and has learned a lot and has become a more actualized real boy. That it's not about who you are on the outside, it's who you are on the inside. That's cool.
Yeah.
And again, in a movie where I'm just like grasping for like anything to sort of like surprise or interest me, like I liked that. I think more so I really liked the inclusion of the Fabiana character, and the puppet Sophia. Every moment they were on screen was just an absolute delight. I thought that both actresses did a very good job. Because we had one who is playing the girl who is part of Stromboli's puppeteering troupe, with a leg injury, but you can tell that she wants to be a dancer and has these dancing chops, but has this one physical thing that's impeding her. And then she has this puppet that is has a completely different voice, and has character and personality all of its own. That was my favorite. I mean, seriously, favorite scenes of the movie were any scene that those two characters were in. They were just so damn good.
Yeah,
I liked it. Go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say I really liked the inclusion of the Fabiana and Sabina mechanic. I think having Sabina as another puppet that Pinocchio could, like, I don't know, relate to and trust was really interesting. I think about therapy, of all things, for little kids. A lot of times, therapists of kids will use dolls and toys because kids relate to and trust those things, and that will get them talking. And I thought that was a really cool way of kind of getting Pinocchio out of his shell a little bit, and getting him to trust. I thought that was clever. Plus, I really love the performance of those two characters. It is a little unrealistic because Sabina is able to talk without any obvious means of her mouth moving. There's no like string on the
Yeah,
very
that was
back of her
weird.
head,
Yeah.
that would operate
Well,
the mouth.
not
But
only that, but it would have been better if the Fabiana character was actually doing the singing for Sabina. But in scenes where they showed her singing and they showed Fabiana, like her lips weren't moving. It was
They
she's a
really
weren't
weird.
moving,
ventriloquist,
but
Jim.
she was doing this.
Is she
Like,
a
there's this.
ventriloquist? Did they set that up?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so
Okay.
they did the thing where, like, whenever you looked over at her, her mouth was sort of like in this like locked in pose,
Yep.
which
Yeah,
whenever
yeah.
you watch like a stage ventriloquist doing a thing, like they have that same sort of locked in pose, right?
It's like, how can I avoid trying to do lip syncing and make it look realistic? I can make the character a ventriloquist and just tell her to just put your lips in this mode right here. We'll just call you a ventriloquist.
I loved
Yeah,
it so much. I loved seeing how she sort of did this, like, when she would do her dancing, like, on point, both with her air quotes, good leg and her injured leg. She was, despite having this like obvious impairment, she was still very mobile, very graceful, all of those things. I thought that was cool. And then she got to be even more so through the puppet, which was just, it's like, oh, look at her powerful legs and her dancing and flipping all over the place. It was such a breath of fresh air. And I don't mean that the same way I meant at the end of the movie where I'm like, I was grasping for anything. This was legitimately good, like these scenes there, to the point where, like, I mean, realistically, whoever it was that was in the writer's room that came up with that character, next time just give them the reins on the whole entire script. That was so damn good.
Yeah, I would have liked to have actually seen more of that. Maybe seen her to the end a little bit more. I know she did pop up toward the end a little bit, right? And like, oh, look, I got my own thing now, and we kicked out Stromboli and all that. And that's great, but it was very much like tell instead of show. So I wish there was just more to that. The weird part of this, that middle part where Pinocchio and Fabiana and Sabina are performing like in Stromboli's thing, I thought the middle part of this movie was probably the strongest for me. where they're captive and they're doing their performances. The performances were good. The singing was good. The song was good. It actually reminded me of another movie that's totally different, but now that I think about it, does lean heavily on Pinocchio, the story of Pinocchio, and that's The Elephant Man, when John Merrick is paraded out to perform for people, right, at the hands of a kind of a wicked, evil, carnival dude. And it was weird as I'm watching this kids movie that I'm thinking back to a movie like The Elephant Man, but it was very similar story beats in here. I also wanted to call out there were the Treasure Island sequence. I thought was pretty good. There's a lot of troubling territory that this movie had to kind of work around, because the original showed kids drinking alcohol, smoking, basically getting high, and then getting turned into donkeys. That I think this movie obviously had to, in today's age, had to do something else with. Beer became root beer, and there was no smoking, and the smashing of the clocks and all that stuff. I still found that scene very troubling from a Pinocchio standpoint. Like, I could see how he would be troubled in that situation. But I did like that scene.
So the friend I mentioned earlier that has 2 young children, she was telling me that her kids were terrified of the scene where the kid becomes a donkey and he's like kicking around and bucking in the shop. And she told them, if you kids aren't good, that's what's going to happen to you. And today they're like, Mama, we don't want to be donkeys. We'll be good. We promise. And she was just making a joke, but apparently they took it very seriously. And, but it's funny that she told me that story, because as I was watching that scene, I was a little terrified for that kid. Like, he turned into a real looking donkey, not like a fake, animated donkey. And there was something about the fear in the donkey's eyes as he realizes like what's happened to him. And it was really disturbing. I kind of liked that.
There's something about this movie, that there are 2 things about this movie that really, like, I don't know. I think that because they're borrowing from the original and you're reflecting them nowadays, they read very differently on screen, right? One of them is, this is the character of Pinocchio. I know he has to go on this ordeal to be like a better boy, to become a real boy, but I found myself feeling very sorry for this character, because this wasn't like a character who was making a bunch of shitty decisions. This was a character who was basically like human trafficked, but like with the puppet version, like twice in a row, back to back on the same day, by people who manipulated him for his ignorance and naivety, right? Like, he tried to go to school first, and when they kicked him out, the person said, oh yeah, your father said this is what you're supposed to do, so come with us. I didn't feel like, oh, did you learn your lesson, Pinocchio? Like Jiminy said, like, that's like, honestly, I felt like that's like going up to, like, this is dark, but like going up to a kid in the mall and saying like, yeah, your dad said come with me. Like, you don't blame the kid for that. So I felt really weird about that. And I also felt really weird about fucking Jiminy Cricket in general in this one as the conscience. It seemed like his role as conscience was just to sort of follow behind the story and then take credit at the end. I don't know. That's I
had a problem with the appearance of Jiminy Cricket. Actually,
his face was weird. I know they're trying to make him look
half a mask on, or
something. Well, they're trying to give him more of a realistic cricket face.
Crickets have those mouth parts, but I don't know that it necessarily reads as well on screen.
Yeah. Real quick, just because we are running down the clock, a few other differences. New character was introduced, the seagull Sophia. What did you guys think of the Sophia Pinocchio water ski scene?
I mean, it wasn't much for me, unfortunately. I mean, I think it was a way to just throw another action sequence. I don't remember it having anything like that in the first movie, in the original movie. It seemed kind of silly. I didn't care for it that much. I liked the character. I wish we got more of the character.
Mhm.
The Sophia, but I didn't, the water skiing scene, I think, was just a way to get from where they were to Monstro, right? Monstro is a thing in the original.
Who in himself is a big difference in this movie. He's a sea monster instead of a
Instead
whale.
of a whale. Yeah.
I don't know if it makes that much of a difference,
I
but
think they said in
apparently
the
it does.
original, one, he was in the original property, the
The book.
book was a sea monster, and Disney turned it into a whale
Mm.
and then turned it back into a sea monster.
Back into a sea monster here, sort of like a whale-like
kind of a
thing, but
yeah.
with like all those like tentacles
Yeah,
and stuff
yeah,
like
Mhm.
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I was neither neither here
Let's
nor
see if
there
we
on
can
that.
make everybody
Um,
happy. We'll keep the sea monster and keep some of the whale, and yeah, it'll be a whale-ish thing.
Some of the scenes with him doing some of the like the more my body's made of wood type stuff, like the water skiing, the motorboat
Mhm.
thing. I almost feel like I would have either like, Jim, I know you mentioned it was silly. At the same time, it's a kids movie. For me,
Right.
I would my preference would have been that they would have either veered more into it or less into it, right? Because there's a whole lot of extra movie where he doesn't do a lot of like wooden puppet stuff, like and I think there's more room for him to have, like, if you're going to kind of play up some of the silly elements, throw a couple of those in, sort of like, in other parts of the movie as well too, just to sort of really have fun with it. That would have been a way that I think it would also solve one of my core problems overall with the movie, but it would have made those feel like they stood out less because it would match more kind of the overall tone of the film.
Yeah, good point.
All right. Any final thoughts on the 2022 Pinocchio before we move on to some plugs?
Cynthia
Again,
Erivo sings well. I like Cynthia Erivo. Wanted to see more of her as the Blue Fairy, but she sang the song well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a bummer that they reduced the Blue Fairy's part in this one. They took away a couple of her appearances from the original movie.
Yeah.
I did see some people get very, very. I mean, and this is a longer conversation than we probably have time
Oh
for.
boy.
But I saw some people very upset. That she was a man. I don't think she was a man. Does that actor
What are you talking
identify?
about?
People
No,
are upset that the Blue Fairy was a man, and I don't think the actor identifies as male. I didn't see
I
anything
have
about
no
that.
no,
idea.
she identifies, unless something has changed super recently, she identifies as female.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Oh, and
And
by
then
the way, you're looking at the alphaba for the Wicked movie.
I'm on board
Yeah,
totally.
I love her. She's great.
And then the other thing is people were upset that they changed her from being a white woman to a black woman.
So
Of
here's an
course.
interesting thing about those people's opinions. They fucking suck, and I don't care. Like
Yeah.
seriously, like I'll
We
I'll make the bold statement, if you're like, there's things that I did not like about this movie. When we watch, like, later on, The Little Mermaid, there's probably going to be some things just based on the track record that I'm not going to like about that movie. The colorblind casting of these actors and actresses is not one of them. And if anyone uses that as the reason to hate these movies, you are an awful person and should just go fuck off.
Well,
Sorry.
I know you
Well-
don't have strong feelings on that, Will.
Yeah,
I
I
know
know.
you don't.
Good grief. This is why
No,
you
but
don't
we're
go on
seeing
the
that.
internet
We're seeing
sometimes.
that's a whole nother discussion. We're seeing that in all across all kinds of properties, and it sucks. You're right.
Yeah.
Will. It sucks.
Yep.
People
we
don't
wanna
like it
see
when fairies
talented
and
people-
mermaids and elves and hobbits are
Oh.
not lily white, apparently.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Totally.
Yep.
All right, fellas. Well, let's wrap up our discussion of Pinocchio then and move on to some plugs. This is the part of the show where we put things on your radar that we love, that we enjoy, that we think you might like. And let's kick things off by going to Will. Will, what is your plug for this week?
So I'm really excited right now, as we have talked about kind of off air. I'm ramping up for festival season. Fantastic Fest is coming up in a few weeks for me, and I'm jazzed. And this is the time of year where a couple of the films that played at last year's fest are starting to hit streaming. So I want to give a recommendation for one. And that is the movie called Saloum, Saloum, which is a movie from it's a Senegalese film that is on Shudder right now. You can watch it. You should watch it. It's a really, really, really cool movie. These three mercenaries they're extracting this drug lord out of this one region, and due to some shit that goes down, they're forced to lay low for a bit in this area that has these sort of like mystical things happening in Senegal. And while they're there, things get weird. This movie is probably tonally the closest thing I can explain and describe it as like almost like From Dusk Till Dawn. Not that there's vampires; it's not a vampire movie, but like when you watch the Robert Rodriguez Dusk Till Dawn with George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino in it, it starts off as sort of like a tense crime drama, and then partway through it turns into a different type of tension as it turns into a horror movie, right? And that's kind of what this movie does. Half of it is just like crime drama shit, and the other half goes balls to the wall. Super fun, super good. It's called Saloum, and it is on Shudder right now. If you like horror, you should absolutely have a Shudder account. So I would strongly recommend you check it out.
All right. Awesome. Thanks for putting that on the radar, Will. Jim, does that sound like one you might want to seek out?
I definitely would seek it out. The problem is we don't have Shudder right now, so
Yeah.
I don't think we do anyway. But
but you could change that.
I know we could change that. Maybe we have to.
Sometimes with these ones that are like, because you can either do Shudders, it's like, oh, standalone thing, or you can do it as like if you have Amazon Prime, you can do it as like an add-on channel. And so I know people who, what they'll do is, if you can't afford like to have a bunch of streaming things happening at the same time, and I get it, there's a bunch, you can sort of build up the list of things that you want to watch on a streaming one, activate it for a month, go balls to the wall, and then deactivate it. And so kind of, just sort of cluster everything in
and
there.
Then activate it on your part, and then do it a year later on your partner's email address.
See,
and your roommates after that.
Yeah.
Oh goodness! All right, Jim, what have you got this week?
Well, I have a movie. We went to the movies to see. We had to go to the movies this weekend. It had been a little while. Went to see this movie called Barbarian. Now, this one is going to be tough to talk about. It's one of those movies that I will not talk about very much, other than to say, I think anybody who likes horror movies needs to see this film. I think this is a must-see horror movie this year. Just similar to the movie last year, was it Malignant? That kind of came out of nowhere, and we loved it, and it was like blew our socks off because it really didn't get much press or buzz until it and then it opened, and like people who watch movies were loving it. And this is one I really loved. It kind of blew my socks off. I'm just going to tell you that you can watch the trailer if you want. The trailer is not very spoilery. The trailer basically is about a woman who rents an Airbnb house and gets to the house and finds out that, oops, it's already rented by this dude. And things go a little squirrely from there. But I'm just going to, other than that, I'm not going to spoil anything. Go in with wide open, with no expectations other than that, and I think you'll be totally fulfilled. The movie is called Barbarian. It's in theaters right now. I don't know when it's going to get a streaming release, but this is a perfect film to see on a Friday or Saturday night. If you can see it with an audience, I think it would be a fun experience. Unfortunately, we saw it on a Sunday matinee, like Sunday at like 1 p.m. So there weren't many people in the giant theater. So we didn't really get the shared experience of like a horror movie. Like, oh no, girl, you're not going to go in that house. Reaction from the crowd. But I bet you if you go on a Friday and Saturday night when it's a little busy, you'll get that reaction, and it'll be totally fun. Barbarian is the name of the movie. Worth seeing.
Yeah, this is another. So this one played at the same Fantastic Fest that Saloum played in last year's. So it's sort of a nice little like genre back to back on this one. This movie you should read or look up as little as possible. Like the experience of like my theater was having just the time of their life reacting to things in real time. So I thought that was really cool. First time film director too. I guess he did like a sort of like a little documentary-ish type thing too. But yeah, Zach Kreger, like he's from a comedy troupe called The Whitest Kids You Know, who did like a good little like kind of online comedy sketches for a while. And to see him go from that over to this is incredibly refreshing. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a good plug. I enjoyed the movie too, but we're not reviewing it, so I'm not going to go into my thoughts. But definitely a good pick. All right, for me, I'm going to plug something that is, let's see, 20 years old? Did I do my math correct? No, 30 years old. Wow. This is an animated series that debuted on Fox all the way back in 1992 that is getting a new life on Disney Plus starting next year. And that is X-Men the Animated Series. I have been going back in preparation for the new show and watching the original 1992 series. And I'm about 2/3 of the way through the first season. And I actually didn't realize how much of this show I didn't see when it aired originally. It was on Fox, and when I was growing up, we did not have Fox. We got 2 channels for the longest time because I'm not going to say I lived on a farm because Jim gets tired of me saying that. I lived in a rural community. And we didn't have much in the way of like television or cable or any of that stuff until much, much later. So I would watch this when I would go to my grandma's house every Saturday. But there were just some Saturdays that we didn't make it over there and I didn't get to watch. And I've seen at least 6 episodes that like I didn't know I hadn't seen. And there's 5 seasons of the series that are available on Disney Plus. The animation I think is great. I love the art style. The stories are fantastic. Will, I don't know, how many are lifted directly from the comic books. You could probably speak more to that, but there's just so many great different arcs that happen on this show. If you are potentially looking forward to the new X-Men series that's coming out next year, which is a direct continuation of the series from the 90s, this would be a great time to go back on Disney Plus and catch up with that series. D-Geek Will! Oh my gosh, another Will that we love. Says, did you at least
probably
see the
knows
Phoenix?
something about X-Men.
Probably. He says, did you at least see the Phoenix saga? My answer to that, Will, is Phoenix! Yes, of course. I did see all of those episodes. It's one of my all-time favorite things. I actually put Jim through that series of 4 or 5 episodes or whatever it was before the last X-Men Phoenix-related movie came out. So, Jim, I just remembered because of that question that you've actually seen some of this show. Anyway,
I remember watching.
Yeah, it's really good. It's very cool. It's definitely kind of dated. I won't lie. But they're bringing back a lot of the voice cast, and it's going to be awesome. I can't wait for the new one as well. So now's your time to get ready.
Yeah, it's exciting. X-Men 97 is going to be what the new series coming out next year, sort of a direct continuation of those 5 seasons. I mean, a lot of these stories are lifted and adapted from the comic books, but of course filtered through the animated series, which itself was sort of adapted from the X-Men Blue, X-Men Gold kind of era of comics and sort of turned into the cartoon.
And then the dress thing.
It's exactly. When you looked at
X-Men Blue or is it X-Men Gold?
Sometimes Wolverine was wearing the blue dress and sometimes the gold dress. What was cool was they released a series of comic books called X-Men Adventures, which were adaptations of the animated series, but put into comic book form. So it became this, and I collected those too. So I had those in my little trapper keeper in school. Granted, I'm glad they weren't worth anything, but I would just like punch holes in them and actually have them like in my little binder so I could just kind of read comics all day. Yeah, I'm excited too, Brad.
Oh, nice.
This is my Hank McCoy who sits.
Wolverine.
No, that's Beast.
This is Beast.
Oh, it's Beast.
This is Beast. He sits underneath my Beast stares at me every day when we're podcasting and when I'm working. So
he has the same hair.
I'm excited, Brad. We're Gosh, maybe we do an X-Men 97 episode. I don't know. I'm jazzed.
Ooh,
Do it.
that could be fun. I'd
Do
be
it.
on board. Definitely. All right. Well, I just want to give a big shout out to everybody who joined us. Big Tom was with us as well. Tom, I'm so sorry I didn't see your messages until just a few minutes ago. Jim, he wondered if I made you introduce the movie because you're 82.
Yeah, that's basically what he inferred at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
He said I'm much closer to this movie release than anybody else who's living on the planet Earth right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not exactly what I meant, but it's close. But thank you to Thomas and Mike and Will and everybody else who's with us in the live chat. If you are listening through the magic of digital tape delay, we still want to hear your thoughts on Pinocchio, films in general, whatever. Drop us a line at MB Podcast on Twitter or find us on Facebook. Just look for Movie Bears Podcast and comment away. Jim.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I know what you meant now. You meant because I'm Italian that I'm closest to the property, right?
No,
Pinocchio.
That's not it at all.
Is that what you meant?
I meant that you.
I was giving you the benefit of the doubt there.
I meant that you were alive closer to the release of the original than either of us were.
Okay.
Yeah. But I wasn't saying you were 82.
So it's as bad as I thought. Okay.
No,
sometimes the best thing to do is just sort of sit back and just let someone dig themselves.
I might have the most love for the original property. How's that?
Listen, all I'm going to say is you probably got to watch it when you were a kid, and you got to see it closer to its original release than we did watching it as kids. Yeah. That is a fact. It is not.
It was already a quarter century old, probably, when I saw
it. Right.
You know, you mentioned the years thing. You said that it was based off a book from 1982. So it's 1883. So less than 60 years passed between the book and the Disney movie, and 82 years have passed since the animated. It has been in the public consciousness as the Disney version longer than it was as a book before it was adapted. And I thought that was sort of interesting. Like, my brain was doing the math
all the way back to the Tim McGraw age. Yeah, of
1883. The TV series,
the Yellowstone.
Yellowstone. Yeah. All right. It is that time for our social sound off. I came up with a new name for this segment of the show, Social Sound Off, where we tell you where you can chat with us between now and our next recording. Jim, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at my Twitter handle, which is at JJP Out West. It's where I like to kind of catch up on, hear about movies and see stuff related to movies and a little bit of politics, but not much. And then under my Facebook profile, Jim Pugliafico.
All right. Thank you so much. Will, how about you?
All right. Instagram, Twitter, at whatever cove.
Insta.
Hit me on the Insta. Find me on Facebook, William Lindis. Find me on Letterboxd, under William Lindis as well. And find me on TikTok at The Movie Bear. So lots of socials.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Will. You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at iBradPro, like iPad Pro, but iBrad Pro. Mm-hmm. Clever, huh? You can also find me on Facebook. Just look for Brad Harris. I'm the one who likely has Bear, Chubb, and Chaser friends in common with you. I just ask that you send me a message first so I know you're a real boy or girl or, and not a bot, because bots are getting pretty clever these days. If I ask you to do a CAPTCHA test, please don't be offended. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't ask you to do that. I might ask for dick pics, but that's a different thing.
Select all the squares with dicks.
Oh, weird. It's all of them.
Damn, that's just too bad. All right, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. We will catch you all next time on episode 450 of the Movie Bears podcast. We'll see you then. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.